Day.
As you would have seen in last night's debate and over the last week of this campaign, there's been a lot of focus on costings. Well, this will come to a head tomorrow when Treasury releases its PFO figures. That's the pre-election fiscal outlook figures. This is mandated that 10 days into the campaign, Treasury releases its latest judgment of what the bottom line looks like and what the economy is going to look like. It's meant to be without any interference or influence from government, goes to both parties. The idea is then they can look at those independent numbers and tell us all how they're going to make their promises add up. Now, Tony Abbott has made it clear they will be looking at these figures, but don't expect him to produce the coalition's costings straight away.
We've made some very significant commitments, obviously, but we've also made some very significant commitments to savings as well. There are $17 billion worth of savings in the measures that I announced in my budget reply and also in the National Press Club speech back in January. We've got the pre-election fiscal outlook coming out tomorrow. We will carefully study that. We'll have more to say about savings quite soon, and you'll have our full fiscal statement in good time before the next election.
And what about the government? Of course, they will also have to produce some sort of costing statement before the end of the campaign if they make new promises that are going to add to the deficit. The Prime Minister said Labor will be relying on those Treasury figures as well, of course, and defended the Treasury's ability on estimating the bottom line and the growth figures after serious downgrades in recent years.
Treasury provides its best analysis of the revenue projections. We act within that. That's the proper way in which government's done. You can't sort of have some plan in the back of your pocket, or what if this projection is wrong, or what if that projection is wrong. So we operate honestly on the basis of the data we're given. And can I just suggest to the country at large that we have adhered to the disciplines based on the numbers we are given. I would just request that Mr Abbott be subjected to the same discipline.
Matthias Cormann is one of the Coalition's campaign spokesmen, and he's also the Shadow Assistant Treasurer. Welcome to the program. I just want to start, if you can explain the Coalition attitude towards the figures we'll get from Treasury tomorrow. Do you see those as independent?
Well, we accept that their Treasuries and Finance's best estimate of the current state of the budget, yes.
So you're not going to suggest these are influenced by the government, that Labor's bullied Treasury into the figures that come out tomorrow?
Well, we have said for some time that clearly the government has sought to bully Treasury into a set of numbers. I mean, that is the only reason why they released a pre-election economic statement 2 days before calling the election, the same way as they did in 2010 when Wayne Swan followed the exact same process. But of course, look, we accept that the pre-election economic and fiscal outlook released tomorrow is the best professional judgment of the Secretaries of Treasury and Finance. We'll study the document carefully. We'll continue to go through proper methodical process. We'll review the assumptions and the forecasts, and of course we'll have more to say about it once we've concluded that part of the process.
But will you add to that some private sector analysis that could influence your costings at the end of the day?
Look, we'll provide a response to the pre-election economic and fiscal outlook once we've had a chance to properly study it. And of course, you know, we'll be seeking relevant and appropriate advice as you would expect us to do.
Now, there's been a lot of focus on how the Coalition is going to make everything add up. You have been pointing to, and Tony Abbott's been pointing to, the savings already announced. I just want to go to some of those because there are some savings there that have already been announced. The $17 billion in savings announced by Tony Abbott in his budget reply. One of the things he said in that budget reply was that, quote, "We won't back a so-called national education system that some states don't support." It was claimed the Coalition would save $3.2 billion by not proceeding with the Gonski reforms. Well, now the Coalition is backing the Better Schools reforms over the first 4 years. So does that mean that $3.2 billion saving is no longer there?
Well, actually, the list of $17 billion worth of savings that we referred to earlier in the week did not actually have that in it. And furthermore, you'll find that over the forward estimates, there is not actually a $3.2 billion impact from Labor's point of view either. So, I mean, the savings that we've announced so far, which offset the commitments that we've made to income tax cuts and pension increases without a carbon tax, and to the 1.5% cut in company tax, both parts of our plans to help people with their cost of living pressures and to help grow the economy more strongly and create jobs. The savings that we have announced so far, the $17 billion worth of savings, actually do not list that particular measure that you've just mentioned.
One that is included there is the delay in the scheduled increase in the superannuation guarantee. You want to delay that by 2 years, and that's meant to save $2.5 billion over the forward estimates. But pushing it back by 2 years, isn't that just pushing back that cost by 2 years? It will eventually still go ahead, won't it?
Well, what we've said is that instead of getting to the full 12%, we would, instead of getting there by 2019, we would get there by 2021. And of course, slowing down the rate of increase does enable a saving to be achieved by the government. And I mean, incidentally, it also helps to achieve a saving to the extent that the increase in compulsory super is a cost for business, it helps to reduce the cost of doing business, and to the extent that it is a cost that is carried by individual employees, it is of course additional take-home pay in people's pockets right now, which helps deal with their cost of living pressures.
You'll still go ahead with the same increase, won't you, just 2 years later?
Well, but except, I mean, obviously the increase is always 2 years behind, which means that it's an ongoing saving essentially all the way up until 2021.
Now, on the fringe benefits tax, just to clear this up, is it your policy that all employees should be entitled to an automatic deduction regardless of how much they use their vehicle for work?
Well, our policy is to reverse the bad and ill-thought-out decision that was made by Kevin Rudd on the run. I mean, you've got to remember the Henry Tax Review reviewed very carefully the fringe benefits tax arrangements when it comes to the salary packaging of cars, and it was the Henry Tax Review which recommended the 20% statutory formula, so-called, and in fact the current Labor government legislated the current 20% statutory formula just 2 years ago.
But do you think workers should be, employees should be using their car for work to claim that?
Well, I mean, clearly, the Henry Tax Review, which was commissioned by the Rudd Labor government, reviewed the fringe benefits tax arrangements as they apply to the salary packaging of cars very carefully, and they made a considered recommendation to government, which the government only legislated 2 years ago. For Kevin Rudd to come out, overnight and change taxation arrangements, hit yet another important industry for Australia, the car industry and the salary packaging industry, with an overnight taxation change, creating massive... it's just completely reckless and irresponsible.
I understand your point. I understand the point you're making, but my question is, should employees actually be using the vehicle for work?
Well, of course, I mean, we say that, I mean, we completely support the current position that is currently enshrined in the legislation, and which was legislated by the government as recently as 2 years ago.
All right, Shadow Assistant Treasurer Matthias Cormann, we'll have to leave it there, but no doubt we'll catch up later in the week once we have those Treasury costings and a lot more to talk about.